Hi friends! Today I'm showing a great way to practice your hand sewing skills by focusing on the backstitch, which is the strongest stitch without using a sewing machine. First you're going to need to grab some contrast thread. I prefer red so you can see it easily, and some adhesive tape measures. Cut about a piece of thread that's about 24 inches and loop it through the eye of the needle. And then at the end you're just going to do a simple knot like this. I would keep it about an inch away from the tails and make sure the tails are nice and crisp so that you don't have any fraying. I have some scrap fabric here, which is great to practice on. Now naturally, if you're going to be working on an actual project, you do want the right sides touching each other, but because I think the spider webs are cute, we're going to keep it on the outside. Hope you don't mind. So really easy, fold it in half and make sure you have at least 2 layers to work on. It's just a better way to get used to that, because that's really how you're going to be hand sewing most of your projects, for like apparel especially. Pin both layers together. Now I have a permanent sewing gauge tattoo, but I'm not using it for this. Instead, I'm going to be using an adhesive tape measure like this one here. First, you're going to take a little inch piece and press it right onto your thumbnail. Now you can either press this parallel or at an angle, whichever you prefer. And since I'm right-handed, I'll be sewing from right to left. If you're left-handed, you'll go from left to right on the fabric. Now to start practicing, I would recommend using a 1-inch wide piece of adhesive tape measure and a 1/4 inch long stitch width. So the reason why it's called a backstitch is because you're literally sewing backwards. So you're going to be a 1/4 inch away from your starting point, and that's how you start the backstitching. So again, you're going to be coming through the underside with your needle, which is a 1/4 inch away from where you just started. And you'll be looping the needle through right next to or in the same hole as your previous stitch. And you can already tell that this stitch looks a lot like the sewing machine stitches, and this is why it's one of the strongest hand stitches. Now you would use this for armholes, shoulder seams, anywhere where there's going to be a little extra stress in the garment. This is the best hand sewing stitch to use for those. And take your time when you're practicing hand sewing especially. You don't want to pull too much and you don't want any bunching, so just make sure that you're getting used to just gently pulling the needle through the fabric, and try to do your best to just keep the stitches even. And I think this tape measure method is going to help you a lot with that as you practice. So the same way that you started the backstitching is how you're going to end it. So it's the same method as before, where you're just pulling it through and looping it to the previous hole. And when you're done, you can leave the tail on the underside, and I'll show you later in this video how to secure the knot at the end. And as you get more comfortable with hand sewing, you can go ahead and use a 1/2 inch wide tape measure piece, and this will help you continue practicing your 1/4 inch wide stitch width. I think the toughest part of hand sewing is maintaining a consistent stitch width, so using this tape measure method will really help you keeping the stitches nice and even as you're hand sewing. And again, don't worry about it being like a perfect straight line. As you can see here, I'm starting to curve a little bit, and that's totally fine. Remember, we're just practicing, and you'll get better and better the more you do it. After you become more comfortable stitching with the 1/4 inch wide stitch width, you are going to want to start practicing the 1/8 stitch width. So 1/8 inch is actually the most common for hand sewing stitch width when it comes to backstitching. So you want to start practicing that, and that'll be the easiest to do with the 1/2 inch wide tape measure adhesive piece. And if you prefer, you can actually place the adhesive tape measure directly onto the fabric that you're practicing on. It's really up to you, whichever method you prefer. It's really just going to be a guide for you no matter what, if you put it on your thumb or on the actual fabric. And if you're going to put the adhesive tape measure right onto the fabric, you can actually cut an even wider piece of the tape measure if that makes it easier for you while you're hand sewing. I actually have 2 different options for adhesive tape measures in my Amazon store if you want to check that out as well. And as you continue practicing your hand sewing, eventually you won't even need the tape measure guide to help you. Now I actually have another method to help you with practicing your hand sewing. So here I have a pre-marked line. You can just take a ruler and a pen and just mark a straight line to help you to use as a guideline. So this is very similar to the first method that I had showed you in the beginning of this video. So you're going to take the 2 layers and pin them together. And now that you have the pre-marked guideline, it'll be kind of like a cheat sheet to use as you sew along. So this next method is where you're actually keeping the needle in the fabric in between stitches, and I'm going to show you here how easy that is. So this method is going to be different, where in the first method that I showed you earlier in this video, you were just pulling the needle and thread through for every single stitch that you were working on. With this method, instead of doing that, you're actually keeping the needle stable within that guideline. And I'm going to show you how easy that is here. So just like before, you're going to start your first stitch the same way, where you're going to go out a 1/4 inch from your starting point. And now with the second stitch, you'll be doing this now from now on for this one. So as you can see, I'm going to put the needle through the previous hole and tuck it underneath, and then use the previous stitch as the center point, and then you pull the needle through kind of 2 stitches out, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do it again so you can kind of see the visual. So again, you're going to go back into the previous hole, use that new stitch as the center point. So you're going to double the 1/4 inch and make that a 1/2 inch out, and then pull the needle through again. So this method's only going to be easier once you kind of master the full pull through method that I showed you in the beginning of the video. And I think this will get easier as you keep practicing along, where you have more control of the needle going through the fabric. The main difference of this method is you're going to have more control of the thread. So the thread will primarily stay on the top side instead of you pulling it through the top and the underside, which sometimes can make the thread bunch up or tangle a little bit. So whichever makes it easier for you, and the more comfortable you get with hand sewing, you'll find the method that works best. So when you're done, you're actually going to flip to the underside, and this is how you kind of anchor the stitch that you just worked on. So this is going to be the most secure way to finish the back stitching. So my method is, I'm going to show you kind of like a larger scale just so it's a better visual, because we're working on a 1/4 inch stitch width. You're going to be using the last stitch that you had pierced through the fabric as kind of like an anchor for the last knot you're about to place in. And this way you're keeping the top and the underside stitches very uniform, so it looks very smooth, kind of like a sewing machine stitch. So instead of the large loop that you worked on previously, you're going to go for the last full stitch, and that's going to be your anchor to knot either 2 or 3 knots with the needle and thread. And this way you're going to secure your stitch that you just worked on. So again, you can either do 2 or 3 knots at the base of that last stitch that you worked on before you flipped it over. And I'm hoping this way you can kind of see clearly how to do this knot. Your eyes might start crossing at this point, but it's okay. Just practice and you'll get the hang of it. But I think 2 or 3 knots is fine. That should be secure enough to finish off your back stitching, especially by hand. This is a pretty strong stitch that you're working on. So I hope you found this video really helpful. I think it's a great way to practice your hand sewing, especially with back stitching. Hand sewing is a great way to kind of start your sewing journey, especially if you don't have a sewing machine. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful, and follow and subscribe for more free sewing tips. Pugsy says hi. Happy sewing.